Hello, I'm Ronnie Bringle, and we're learning a little bit about color by painting a color wheel of fruit. Last week we mixed our own colors to put on our color wheel by using the three primary colors of yellow, red, and blue. So we're going to paint this project with a color wheel of fruit by using the primary colors, the secondary colors, and the tertiary colors that we mixed in the video number 1 called Just a Little Bit About Color Part 1. And you'll find the colors that I've used in the Golden Open and colors in the Jo Sonja Artist Acrylics listed on that first video, Just a Little Bit About Color Part 1. So let's get started on this fruit design. I wanted to start at the very top with my yellow, and so I had this originally designed with a yellow plum up here in the top section, but I decided I really wanted to have a brighter yellow color up there. So I went ahead, I got myself a lemon, and I replaced my plum with this lemon. And so you can see a little bit of smudging here on my design work. That's because I changed it and got a little bit of the chalky lines smeared around, but I think those will disappear as I go along. So we will get started on our lemon, and then we'll move to the lemon leaves. I also changed the shape of these leaves a little bit to make them more representational of lemon leaves, since lemon leaves are a little bit longer and not quite as fat as the leaves that I originally had on the design. I've zoomed in now for a little closer look at the lemon, and I've turned it around somewhat to make it a little bit easier for me to work on. I'm going to use one of my oval Bringle blenders. Probably for the size of this design I'm going to use a number 6 oval. And I'll just pick up my yellow color. Again, those colors are listed in Just a Little Bit About Color Part 1. And I'm not going to go over those colors this time. But I'm going to lay this color on pretty heavily. Now, I absolutely love working on a black background, but it also means that in some instances it's going to take more layers of paint to cover the black. Sometimes we'll be more than happy to let that black work for us, and I may end up doing that on this lemon, but just so you know, it's going to take a few coats of paint to make this look smooth and nice, so it's not going to look too wonderful just yet. I want to make sure that I push my color out and cover up my pattern lines, and I want to work on a kind of a small area at a time rather than working on one large area. Now, if we take a look at our color wheel, and I've really got it blown up big here, we can see if we put a little arrow, a little straight line from the yellow across the color wheel, what we end up with over here on the opposite side of the yellow is our violet color. And so that's the complementary color of yellow. If it's directly across from the color, it's called a complementary color. Now, when we mix complementary colors together, we normally get kind of a gray. We can gray the colors down somewhat, and some people refer to that as toning or muting. What it does is it lowers the intensity of that color and it mutes it or tones it down. So I'm going to pick up some of my violet on my brush, and I'm using a dirty brush, so it's still got some yellow in it, and on my palette I'm just kind of mixing those two together to create kind of a muted greenish yellow color. And I just want to put this in a place where I know I want to create a little lower value, lower intensity of yellow. And as I said, now remember, these first layers are really not going to indicate very much because we're working with this very transparent yellow over black. So first of all, we're just going to get a very greenish kind of transparent, streaky looking yellow. To form something round, we want to make sure that our shading colors, our darker values, are going in a curved pattern. So as I'm putting my darker, my toned value on here, I'm making sure that I'm creating this curve to my lemon. Now that is going to have to dry before I can do another coat. That will be my first coat. I have a little bit of a glare here when the paint is wet, so I'll try to tip this up somewhat so you can see it just a little bit better. And I'm going to go ahead and dry that, and then we'll put on the second layer. I'm back with my lemon all dried up now, ready for the second layer. So I'm going back into my straight yellow, and all I'm going to do is reinforce and enhance this area that I know I want to be very, very yellow. And I'm just kind of laying this on and whisking it in a very loose fashion. We don't have to work very hard at this point to create the dark values, because that black background is going to do a lot of that. But I'm just going to use that same brush and place this yellow where I know I want it to be the lightest and brightest yellows. Did you know that Sir Isaac Newton was the person who originally discovered that white light contains color? He shined it through a prism and discovered all the colors of the spectrum. And then, when people realized there were so many colors and artists began to find those colors in nature where they could mix pigments for their paints, then there was an artist named Albert Munsell who organized those colors into a pattern that artists could use in their work. And that Munsell system is what I use. There are several other systems of organizing color. The Munsell is what I was taught early on, and it's what I still use. So that's the system that we're working with in this series called Just a Little Bit About Color. I'm back into my violet color now, and I'm just kind of whisking some of that on. Now this time, as I let this layer dry, I think we'll move over to the lemon leaves. What I want to do is give a good representation of the yellows that are on the color wheel. Some yellow can go into more of a warm category, and some yellow can go into more of a cool category. The cool yellow, of course, has a lot more green in it, and the warmer yellow has more red in it. So I want to move to the left now. If we look at the color wheel again, to the left we'll see that we have this yellow-green color. So what I want to do is to create on these leaves, because of the placement in the design, what I want to do is to create something kind of right here on this line. Something between the yellow and the yellow-green, so that we can see that it's moving towards that yellow-green color. So I'm going to pick up my yellow and put that in my brush. For leaves, I generally use a round blender, one of my round Bringle blenders. I'm going to use a number 4 for this one. And I'm going to pick up the yellow. In case it's a little confusing to you, this little thing here that looks like an egg, that's the hole in the painter's palette, so that could be a little bit confusing, I guess. Okay, I'm going to pick up my yellow, and I'm going to pick up just a little bit of my yellow-green mix, the mix that we did with our lesson last time. I'm going to turn this around so that I can work on it easily. And I'm just going to put this yellow-green color up here in the tip of the leaf, and kind of just pat it around. Now at this point, you know, it's very early on in the painting of these leaves, and so I'm not too worried about color just yet, but I am going to pick up some other toned color to work on. And so if we look at the color wheel again, and we see that across from yellow green we have the red violet. Sorry, I wasn't looking at it just right. Red violet is what we have across from yellow green. So I'm going to pick up my red violet. Sometimes when you're doing a video you have to think and talk and do all at the same time, and your brain sometimes doesn't want to get a hold of that. Now all I'm doing with this is just kind of tapping and patting the paint in a way that kind of blends the two together. As I said, in this initial couple of layers I'm not going to worry too much about the particular details of this leaf, where the veins are, but I just have to lay down a little bit of color. Now for the hidden leaf, back in here, I want to take the intensity and the value of that leaf down a little bit. So for that one I'll pick up a little more of my violet, and I'm going to mix it up with my lime green, excuse me, not my lime green, but my yellow green, and my yellow. Remember, we're not going quite into a strong yellow green yet. We're just doing kind of a cross between yellow and yellow green. So it's a yellow green. And we're using some violet and some red violet. And I'm just tapping that in there. I want to make sure that leaf sits behind the lemon. I also want to make sure that it's kind of pulled back onto the background, so I'm using a darker value and a lower intensity of the yellow-green. But we'll kind of adjust that as we go along. And when I say the wrong thing, I'll try to catch it and correct it as I go along, but like I said, sometimes painting and talking at the same time don't mix. Okay, back in my yellow with a little bit of yellow-green. And I'm going to create some of the lighter value on this leaf. And I'm just kind of patting that paint. I turn the brush over to get more paint off the other side. And again, now I want to go into my more of my violet. I said blue violet before, and like I said, I'm trying to say the right things, but sometimes they come out wrong. And all you have to do is look at your color wheel, and you can see that yellow-green is violet, red violet, sorry, and yellow is violet. Okay, so we've got yellow, its complementary color is violet, and yellow-green, its complementary is red violet. Okay, so if we're painting something that is going to be a kind of a cross between these two, then we can also, for complementary colors, we can use a cross between these two. So, you know, you're using your red violet and your violet, red violet and violet, and it isn't highly critical on these leaves whether you pick up one or the other. It's a matter of how much blue do you want in there. The more blue, as we go into the violet has more blue in it than the red violet does. As we go into a little more blue, then your toned yellow-green is going to turn more green because it's got more blue in it. As you go into more red, it's going to turn into more of an orangey, muted, very dark orangey yellow color. So those are things that happen when you touch your palette with your brush and you pick up a little bit of this and a little bit of that and you blend it on your palette and you come away with a color that you like. If it's too blue, then you go back and you pick up more of the red violet. If it's too red, you go back and pick up a little more of the plain violet that has a little more blue in it. Okay, so this is just our initial laying on of color now on these green leaves. Okay, and I believe my lemon now is probably dry enough to work on again, but I think I'll dry it with a hairdryer again just to make sure. I'm ready to go again with my next layer, and I've got pretty good coverage going on the lemon. Well, it's not good coverage yet, but I do have a couple coats on there, and it's starting to at least look yellow. I'm going to switch over to a dry stippling method, and I'm going to use my round blender for that. I've got my yellow on there, and I'm going to focus on the part of the lemon that I want to be nice and round and fat. I'm not talking about highlighting yet. I'm talking about just creating the full roundness of a lemon. And we have to use values and intensities to do that in order to create a three-dimensional look on a one-dimensional object, which is our painter's palette. So I've stippled and done a little bit of dry rubbing on there with my round blender. I'm going to go back into my my violet and maybe a little bit of red violet. And I'm just going to play around a little bit, because as I'm going along I have to decide and think about where I want to have some of these dark values. And for this step I'm just kind of doing maybe a little bit of careful stippling, dry stippling in some of the darkest areas, but then mostly just a little bit of dry rubbing to blend into that yellow. I don't really want to brush across that yellow at this point because it's wet. I don't want to lift it up. So I'm just going to kind of tickle into it without really rubbing across it. Okay, and then I'm going to go back into my yellow, and I'm going to go with a pretty dry brush now. I've got the paint worked into the brush. If you're not sure what these techniques are, you can check my videos. I have a video series called Terms and Techniques, and I talk about and demonstrate all the different techniques that I use there, how to load the brush and what the brush should be like. So you can refer to those videos to see what these techniques are. So I'm just tapping in these small areas. I'm tapping a little bit of yellow in there because I'm thinking I need to create the shape of this lemon. So if we look at this lemon like this, okay, this is what we're trying to do right here. And you can see the shadowing on the sides. You can see this funny little thing here where it grew kind of weird right in there. That's what I want to create, because I don't want to just do a simple plain old lemon. I want to do something that has just a little bit more interest to it. So we're going to create this slightly deformed lemon. Here's what it looks like all the way around. It just has a whoops, now you found me out. I picked a lemon that had a little bit of a smoosh on it, but we're not going to paint that part. So we just want to make sure we have this little interesting little nubbin on the end. Okay, so as I'm painting this, then I want to create this little bit of light and dark down in here. While that's drying, I'll go back to my leaves, and for this step I think I'll also do a little bit of stippling and dry rubbing. So I'll go back to a fairly small round blender. Now here's what I do. I have two round blenders here in size 4. You see one of them is kind of flipped out and furry looking, and the other one has more of a point on it. So when I'm going to do a stipple, I would probably, well, I would for sure use this brush that has more of a flipped out tip on it, and save this one for smaller areas that I wanted to do a little more fine work in. So we're going to use the grungy number 4 blender brush. I'm going to pick up some of my yellow-green mix that we mixed in our last exercise. And I want to think about the fatness of these leaves and where I want to create the lightest part of the leaves and where the light might be hitting them, and where the roundness of the leaf, so that I can indicate again a three-dimensional look. If I feel like I'm getting a little too green, too much green, I can pick up a little more yellow. If I feel like it's too yellow, then obviously I'd pick up a little more of my yellow green. So it's really a matter of choice at this point, what colors you want to work with. But what I'm trying to achieve here is I'm trying to show how this color wheel goes from yellow to yellow-green. And so instead of doing it in one step, I'm doing it in two steps. So these leaves that are going to be painted here will kind of be the first step towards yellow-green. And when we get around to the bottom part of our color wheel, then we'll see a little more of straight yellow-green in some of these leaves. Okay, so I'm just creating. Now I'm back into my violet and red violet. It's totally a matter of choice at this point. I have my dirty yellow-green on my brush and picking up some of those violet colors and just tucking them into some of the dark areas. I'm using my violet colors at this point to serve two purposes. I'm creating some darker values and some lower intensities, but I'm also creating some blushing on the leaves. Some places, because leaves are not always just green. They do have other colors in them, and many times leaves have more of other colors than they do of green. So we can introduce quite a few colors. For now, I'm going to try to stick mostly with my yellow-green and just introduce a little bit of a blushing color. Later on, when we have the whole color wheel painted, we might go back and just tweak it a little bit by adding interesting blushes and some tints onto our leaves. I'm going back into my yellow and a little bit of my yellow-green, and I'm just going to, again, just come back in here and play around in it, blend it around until I have a nice blend with all of my values that I have on the leaf. I picked up quite a bit of yellow on that little spot there. As I said, we want to just gently go from yellow to yellow-green, so I don't want to get too heavy-duty with my yellow-green just yet. I'll put some. I'm just thinking about creating a vein in this leaf now, so that's why I kind of made a line there with my yellow. We don't want to have a super hard line, so I put the line in and then I just softened it a little bit. And I'll put a little bit more of my yellow. I did just pick up some straight yellow, and we'll just kind of play around on this leaf. I love to paint leaves. I love to play around with them until they look just perfectly right. Okay, so I'm going to dry this again and we'll get ready for the next layer. I'm still building the layers up on my lemon, so I'm going back again to my round blender and picking up my yellow in and working it into the brush so that I can do some stippling again. My surface is dry now, and you can see now that it's starting to really create an opaque color. Like I said, the black is hard to cover with yellow, and if we were painting this lemon on, let's say, red or white, we'd get a different look. We wouldn't have some of these darks in place already, so it's kind of a little cheat to paint on the black, because you can easily get some darks in place really rather quickly. And so at this point I'm just I'm going to play around between my yellow and my violet until I like the way it blends and I like the way it looks. Anything that's looking a little too transparent still, I'll go in there and just tap a little bit of my yellow in place. I want to create a little bit of a reflected light along that lower edge. I've turned it around so that I can easily do that. I'm going to pick up my yellow on a small oval blender, just on the tip of the blender. If you're painting with Gelsonnia paint, you can use a little bit of magic mix in your brush to make this go on just a little bit smoother. And I'm scooping the paint up onto the tip of the brush, and I'm pushing that tip out to the edge of the lemon so that I can create a lightness along the edge that then blends into the darker shading. Okay, and then I'm just going to play around again a little bit with some of my violet. And whisking and kind of brushing. If I kind of make a little blotch somewhere, I'm not going to worry about it because that can all be blended. One thing I wanted to point out to you is where these leaves are on the top of the lemon. When I'm painting, I rarely, if ever, paint around an object that's on top. So in other words, I would never paint around the edge of this leaf. Especially when I'm painting something round, I want to create this rounded look. And if I was to paint around these leaves and leave those leaves all blank, then it would totally inhibit the this process of working round and creating roundness. So what I do, and you know, we have patterns, and that's why we have patterns, is so that we can place those patterns back in place when we need them. And what I generally do is I kind of just fudge a little bit. I don't go way into the leaf, but I don't try to save the leaf either. So what I end up with is just kind of this furry edge here. And then if I lose too much of the leaf, I can put the pattern back on. And if not, I can, you know, I can just kind of chalk it in there when I'm ready to paint the leaves. So again, I'm just working with my violet and my yellow. Those two colors is all I'm working with so far. And the Golden Open paint is so much fun to use because you can kind of just lay it on and whisk it like this, and it blends. If you're using the Gelsonnia paint, you are going to want to let each layer dry before you put the next layer on. With the Golden Open, you can work wet over wet for a longer period of time and with just a little more success. Now when you get this far, it's a matter of, okay, how long do I want to play with this? How much fussing around do I want to do? On this lemon, we're faced with a little bit of a dilemma. Lemons, sometimes you think of lemons as being kind of a greenish yellow, but when I'm looking at this real life lemon, and I don't know if you can see it in my light, but it's not a real green yellow. It's more, it does tend to be a little bit more on the red side, and maybe if I hold it right next to it like this, you'll be able to see that. We're getting a lot of very greenish yellow on our lemon because of that black background. So what I want to do now is I want to just combat that a little tiny bit by adding a little bit of red to my yellow. So what I'm going to do is pick up my neighboring color, which is the yellow-orange. So I'm just going into a little bit of my yellow-orange, and when my surface is nice and dry, I'm just going to whisk over my lemon. I'm not sure my surface is dry enough. I might have to let that dry just a little bit more. I just want to whisk over this with a little bit of a yellow that has a little more red in it. Remember, we made orange by mixing red and yellow. So this yellow that I'm putting on now has just a hint of the orange in it. Okay, the leaves now are dry enough that I can start doing some of the detail on those. Just going step by step, thinking about what I want my leaves to look like as they progress. I'm going to go back to my small round blender, and again my yellow plus yellow green. So I'm not using straight yellow green, I'm using a cross between the yellow and the yellow green. And all I'm doing is just deciding where I want some lights to be, what kind of detail I want to show with my lights. Do I want to show a little bit of a center vein? Do I want to show a little bit of texture? And by doing not quite so much blending, I can show a little bit of a textural look to the leaves. This leaf actually, the edge of this leaf should be coming down on top of that center leaf. So let's pull that down just a bit. Okay. Now I'm also thinking about how lemon leaves grow, and I need to change the shape a little bit. I'm going to pick up some of my violet, my red violet that goes along with my yellow green. Go to red violet, and I want to join this leaf to the stem. Some leaves grow from the stem in big fat shoulders that stick out, but lemon leaves are more tapered as they are joined to the stem. So I want to create a little more of a taper in there. And right now I am just, I'm just planning my leaf, adding details that I know I want in my leaf, or that I think I want in my leaf, and kind of scooching those colors around to create some texture and some interest. Now, generally whenever I do something I overdo it, and I think I've discussed that in my blog a time or two, how I never do anything right the first time, but sometimes that works to my advantage. And if I get quite a bit of that toned color and the darker values, then I can go back with my lighter value again and really get a nice blend. So I'm into my yellow plus yellow green, and I'm just going to kind of tap and rub. You might have to let the surface dry or dry it with a hairdryer in order to not lift. I'm just kind of cheating. I'll dry it in a minute and be able to do a little bit more. Okay. Alright, so what I want to do now is my next layer over dry. So I'm going to go ahead and dry it, and we'll do the next layer. Okay, now that I've got several coats on my lemon and it's beginning to be the right color, I want to think about shading. We talk about shading in the discussion about value. Value is not going to the store and finding a sale. Value is the lightness and darkness of a color. There's a value scale. The very lightest color is white, the very darkest color is black. That and everything in between is numbered. So you've got a value scale of 1 through 10. And if you mix black and white together and put them all next to each other, going from the darkest to the lightest, that would be a value scale. The movement from dark to light, or light to dark, is called gradation. And gradation is just simply the progress from a very dark value to a lighter value, or a medium value to a lighter value, or a light value down to a medium value. So it's just the progression from one value to another. Now on our color wheel, I'll back up just a little bit so we can see a little better. On the color wheel, yellow is our lightest value, and violet is the darkest value. And these colors in between are more in the middle and a little bit darker value on the value scale. So when we want to mix a darker color, darker shade, a lot of times in decorative painting we say a darker shade, but we want to mix a darker value of a color so that we can create that three-dimensional look, then we can mix a darker value by adding black to the color. Some of the colors, yellow especially, it's a little tricky to add black because black is going to turn our yellow green. But we can still add black. So I'm going to pick up a little bit of my black. This is carbon black that I'm using. But did you know you can make your own black? You don't have to use black from a tube. You can actually make your own black. Now what I've got mixed up here is kind of what a lot of people might call an olive green, because I've mixed black and yellow together. So I'm going to use this sparingly because I don't really want to create too much greenness on my lemon, but I do want to create as many values as I can, because that's what's going to give my lemon shape. The other thing to consider is the darker values will recede. So when we make something dark, it's going to pull back, or it's going to fit underneath something else. So this darker value is going to slip underneath those leaves once we get the leaves in place. So I'm just using this very sparingly. Now one of the tricks that you can do with your when you're working with black and yellow together is we can check the color wheel again, and we can look at now at, we've created green. We've mixed black and yellow and we've created a green color. So let's go to the straight green color here now on the color wheel again, and we'll check and see what could we use to make green more muted, or to make it more gray looking. Directly across is our red color. So now I can go back and use some red on my lemon in order to make that green not quite so green. But I don't want to use straight red because we still want our lemon to be yellow. So I'm going to pick up my yellow, put that in my brush, and again, I don't want to use straight red. All I'm going to do is go next door to my yellow and pick up a little bit of my yellow orange. I'm going to add that to my yellow, and that's going to create just a little more redness that will help to take some of the green out of my shade color. You add black to something to create a lower value or a shade. We do think of green when we think of lemons, so in order to, if we want to see a little bit of green in our lemon, that's okay too. We just don't want it to be super green. And the other thing is that we're working on a color wheel. So we're kind of working on two things here. We're working on painting a somewhat realistic looking piece of fruit, plus we're trying to create a color wheel. So we want to create this yellow here on this lemon. We'll create more of the yellow oranges as we get into the pears and the pear leaves. So at this point I've just kind of play around on that lemon until it looked the way I wanted it to look. I did get a little blurb of color out there to the edge that I was a little careless about, so I'll use my wet brush and just take that off while it's still slightly wet. I'll dry this. I've got another couple of layers to do on the lemon, so I'm going to dry it and be ready for the next layers. So I want to get a little bit of shading on my leaves as well. So far I've just concentrated mostly on color, even though some of that color is a little bit darker and works as a little bit of shading in this particular piece. Again, I'm going to mix black with my yellow-green. I'm going to go ahead and just use my straight yellow-green and mix some black with it. And I'm just going to tickle a little bit of this on in some of the very, very dark areas. I want to see some of these leaves almost blend, or some of the parts of these leaves almost blend into that background. So I'm just going to tickle this on. Now I said before that you can mix your own blacks, and they really are lovely to work with, and some of them would work better with the yellow because it wouldn't turn so green if you were trying to stay away from green. Some of the combinations are burnt umber and ultramarine blue, make a nice black. Burnt umber and Prussian blue is a very common, very popular black. A lot of people call it homemade black. Burnt umber and Prussian blue. Another one is burnt sienna and ultramarine blue. Those make nice blacks, and if you mix white with them, they make just really beautiful grays. In the strictest sense of the word, a tone of a color is that color mixed with gray. And you can make your own grays by mixing those colors together. I kind of sometimes cheat a little bit, because if you mix your two complementary colors together, you get a gray looking color. And sometimes I'll use that gray looking color to tone my original color, which is kind of what I did in my lemon. I mixed the yellow with the violet, making kind of a gray color, and that was the color I used to tone my lemon. Okay, so we've got our shade colors now on the lemon and on the leaves. Let's talk about now going with a tint of color. You can see how on my lemon, where I've placed my darker values has started to create a roundness, a fatness to the lemon. I like to talk about it as a fatness. Now you can see very clearly on this lemon where that circle of light is. You have to look through that circle of light first of all to see a value that's not as bright as that very lightest highlight color. We call it a highlight color. It's strictly called a specular light. A specular light is a light that just glares back at you and you can't see the color. If you look straight at that center of that lightest area on the lemon, you can't really see yellow. If you were to isolate it, you would mostly just see white. And that's what a specular light does. When you shine something, when you shine a light on something, and it's a very bright light, and it bounces back at you, and you can't see the color of the object, that's a specular light. But we're not doing that just yet. We're wanting to create a lighter value of yellow that's going to make our lemon look even more round and plump. So I'm going to stipple. I really like to stipple on my light values for the most part. Dry stipple and dry rub. And again, you need to check that Terms and Techniques video to find out what dry stipple and dry rub is. So I'm going to pick up my white and my yellow together, mostly yellow with just a little bit of white. The yellow is very transparent, and so it doesn't take a lot of white to make it into a tint. Now, a tint is a color plus white. Pretty simple, huh? We talk about tinting something, and sometimes what we mean is blushing it, or tinting it with a color that's different from the color of the base. But a true tint is the base color plus white. In this case, I'm not using a bright white. I'm using the in the Golden Open, it's the Titan Buff. In Josonia, it would be Smoked Pearl. Again, that first video, a little bit about color, lists the colors that I've used in this project. Okay, so I've got one layer on there, and I need to let that dry. Let's move to the leaves and put a little bit of lighter value on the leaves. I'm going to pick up my yellow-green and add my white to it. Again, we don't want to use a lot of white. I want to move up in value and intensity just one little step at a time instead of jumping all the way to the end. I always tell everybody that I like to sneak up on these things and not really get in too big of a hurry, because it's harder to blend if you skip too many values or too many steps of intensity. Intensity is the strength of a color. So you can change the intensity by adding anything. You can add white, lighter values. You can add complementary values or colors. You can add darker. You can add your black. And anything you add to the pure color changes the intensity of that color. So that's why we refer to colors as being weak and strong. A strong color would be the color as it comes straight out of the tube. That would be the highest intensity of that color. Okay, now one thing I did do, I kind of sneaked it in on you. I added, I was looking at my lemon, and I could see that down here on the bottom there's a little bit of green down there on the bottom. So I sneaked in just a little bit of my black plus yellow green value down there in the bottom. I think this is going to have to be dried before I can go to my next value. I'll give it a little try and see if I can do it. I'm going to stipple again, and this time in my yellow I'm going to add a little bit more of the white. I'll see if I can get one more value on here, or one more light value on before I have to dry it. I want to get a little bit smaller this time because that's how it's going to show. It goes from the light value to more of a medium value. Okay, I've got that on, and I'll let it dry. Dry it with a hairdryer. I'm going to go a little bit lighter now, adding more of my white to my yellow on my dry surface. And I'm going to go pretty small now to going lighter and lighter and smaller and smaller. And then I'm going to just wipe my brush and take most of the yellow out, add my white color to my brush, and then I'm going to make my smallest area my brightest area. Got to have enough paint on there to do it. So now you can see the roundness of the lemon. I did notice there's another little detail on that lemon that we'll add. I'm going to go into my burnt umber. We'll be lazy and just use some burnt umber out of the tube. And I want to create this little brown, kind of a brown little tip on the end of that lemon. And it kind of, yeah, just kind of like that. And I think that the lemon is probably pretty much complete. We don't really have a small, you know, sometimes when you paint real shiny things you get a very small specular highlight. On a lemon it's not a real reflective surface, it's kind of textured, so it's not going to have a very small hard specular light. Okay, on the leaves, all we have to do now on the leaves is pretty much whatever we want to do. Leaves can be anything. And so I'm going to pick up I'll just do some yellow, green, and white. Yellow, green, and white on my brush. And maybe I'll just play around with them a little bit. And I might play around with them a little bit after I'm finished with the video too. I'll probably wait until I get more of the painting done because everything works in relationship to everything else. So when I get more of the painting done, I'll be making more decisions about some of these elements that I've already painted. I might be adding some darks or lights, or adding maybe even some interesting color just to create a little bit of viewer interest. So I'm just kind of going to tickle that on there, and I'm going to leave that alone. I'm going to dry that, and then I'll do my final detail on the leaves, and we'll be finished with the lemon and the leaves. To paint the veins on the leaves, I want to use a shade of green. So I'm going to take my green, my basic green color that we mixed, and I've added black to it so that I have something you might call blackish green. And on lemon leaves, for the most part, we do see some darkness in those veins. So I'm going to first do my center vein, and then I want to make sure I don't have too much paint on my brush, and I want to do the secondary veins, which I don't do a whole lot of. This is a little bit of artist preference here, and artist license. I kind of just developed my own style of leaf that seems to work for me. And that style does not really include a whole lot of veins, just enough to give the idea of a leaf. Now I'm going to use that same color on my brush, and I just want to come into the edges of the leaf here and there, maybe make a little dent, a little ragged edge, a little curl, just here and there, not a real hard outline. I want to create a little bit of interest along the edge. It's kind of my signature leaf that I do. I'm just going to do two of them so I don't have to turn them around and around. Now you can do, on leaves, you can kind of, from that point, you can add anything you want to add. I'm going to mix a little bit of white with my yellow-green. Maybe I won't, because I think this really needs to be dry. Yeah, my veins need to be dry before I can do that. I might be able to come in and just add here and there a little bit of lightness on those veins. You can come back in with a small round blender, and you can add any more of the light tints by doing kind of a little dry brush in between the veins. So you can add light to them. You can come back and add dark. It's just whatever you want to do. I think as I go along on this piece, as you see me paint more different types of leaves, you'll see different things that you can do to make your leaves look exciting. So let's do a review of what we talked about today. First of all, we have a color, and that is the hue. The hue of this color that we worked with mostly is yellow. Now let's mix a gray color with just using black and white. So we'll take a little bit of white, a little bit of black, we'll take a little more white, and mix a gray. Here's what we learned today. A color plus black creates a shade of that color. In this case, it creates a different color, but that's another story. The color plus gray creates a tone of that color. And a color plus white, I'll just get a little more clean white. Color plus white creates a tint of that color. So this is what I call TTS, tint, tone, shade. Those are your three biggest tools when you're trying to create a dimensional look, a three-dimensional look on something that's one-dimensional. I'm trying to get this so that you don't have quite so much glare and you can see it a little bit better. Tint plus white, tone plus gray, shade plus black. And that's it. That's our lesson for today. I hope that you had a good time painting lemons. I hope that you did prep a funky little piece of something, anything, and painted so that you can paint a pear and some leaves along with me. And that's the very best way to learn about color. I will see you next time.